We're happy to have so many REC Cabinets members present today. And if you'd like to learn more about the REC Cabinet and how you can become a member, we'll put the URL in the chat. Joining Cabinet gives you discounts on our events, access to the REC LinkedIn group, and a great sense of pride in supporting the critical work of the Federation. Plus, you'll get to meet a great group of people. I want to make a quick plug for our next event, which is the REC Day of Service on Sunday, April 11th. This is a great opportunity to give back to the community, do something with your own hands, and share in the spirit of Tikkun Olam with the next generation. And feel free to include your entire family. We're really looking to get the kids involved. We'll be joining each other virtually from your own homes, making baskets for those transitioning from homelessness to self-sufficiency through our partner organization, the St. Joseph Center. Following the virtual event, you'll have a chance to drop off your basket via a contactless drop-off. You should have already gotten an email about the event, and feel free to contact reccabinet@jewishla.org for more information. You can also meet up with other REC members at one of our professional network monthly meetups, which happens every third Tuesday of the month. It's a great way to reconnect with friends and to expand your network on a regular basis. We just had the monthly meetup last night, and there was a great group of REC members present. The next event will be on Tuesday, April 23rd, so keep an eye out for your email. Before we introduce our speaker today, we'll hear from Jay Sanderson, President and CEO of the Jewish Federation. We want to make sure everyone on today's virtual event leaves knowing a bit more about the critical work the Federation is doing to meet the challenges facing our LA Jewish community right now.
Thanks, Bert. Hi, everybody. Nice to see everybody. Here we are again, days away from our second pandemic Passover Seder. Hopefully, many of you have gotten vaccinated and you'll get to be with more of your family this year than last year. But it's clear that this pandemic is a modern day Exodus story. I say all the time that Passover is a transcendent holiday that is deeply personal as well as deeply connected to our Jewish story. This year, we're suffering through the pandemic. And I'm proud to say that with your help and support, our Federation over the past 12 months has been a leader, not just in this community, but nationwide, in dealing with all the plagues that this pandemic has impacted: the loss of loved ones, health challenges, food insecurity, unemployment, isolation of our seniors and Holocaust survivors, anxiety and depression of our young people, the impact on our schools, early childhood centers, camps, and synagogues, the increase of anti-Semitism and racism throughout our community, the increasing challenges on our college campuses. This is the sacred work we have done together, the sacred work that we did together before this pandemic. But the Federation, with your support and your help, and with the leadership of many in the REC, have really led our community. The days ahead are still going to be long. I don't want anybody to think that this pandemic is over the minute that we're all vaccinated. The impact on this community is going to be felt for years to come. But because of the Federation and because of you, we have gotten through this and we will get through the days ahead. I wish you all meaningful Passover Seders, and hopefully you'll take a moment while you're having Passover to talk about the wonderful work that we have done together to heal this community and move this community forward. Thank you all, and thank you, Victor, for being with us today, and I look forward to listening to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thanks for that update, Jay. As you heard, now more than ever, the Federation is making a difference. Please consider making a gift right now to help with this life-changing work. We're putting a link in the chat now so that you can make a gift anytime during this program. Please consider making your 2021 gift or even making an additional gift to support the Federation. Now to the main event. We are so pleased today to have Jesse Sharf moderating this morning's program with Victor Coleman. Jesse has been an integral member of the REC and RPO and a longtime supporter of the Federation's work. Jesse served as REC chair from 2011 to 2012 and RPO chair from 2016 to 2019. He was the 2014 honoree for our annual REC dinner and has chaired the dinner for so many others on countless occasions. He is, in summary, what we hope everyone strives for when it comes to getting involved with the REC and supporting the Federation. Jesse is a partner in the Century City office of Gibson, Dunn Crutcher, and he's a co-chair of the firm's real estate department and a member of the firm's executive committee. Jesse, I'll have you take it away and introduce our honored speaker.
I don't know how many times it's going to tell me to unmute, but hopefully this works. And Victor is here, right?
I'm right here.
All right, sounds good. I don't know where you are on my Hollywood Squares board, but that's okay. First of all, thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, everybody else for putting this thing together. And mostly thanks to you, Victor, for doing this. I know you are a very busy guy. Not a week goes by without somebody asking me whether I know Victor Coleman. And in fact, one of my partners earlier today called me and said, "Hey, do you know Victor Coleman?" And I said, "Not only do I know Victor Coleman, I'm interviewing him in a couple of hours, and can you please tell him to wear a clean shirt?" And the response was, "Are you wearing a clean shirt?" And I said, "Not only am I wearing a clean shirt, I'm wearing a shirt with a collar."
You're wearing a shirt.
That's true as well. So Victor is the classic guy who needs no introduction, but I'll give a very short introduction. I think I first met Victor probably in the mid to late 1980s. I think when you were looking at Airport Center or looking to buy Airport Center in LA so long ago, maybe it doesn't even ring a bell. I've known Victor for 30 some years. He is many different things. He is a mover and shaker in the real estate world, currently the CEO and chairman of Hudson Pacific Properties, formerly one of the co-founders of Arden Realty, literally too numerous to name, including Federation and RPO and UCLA, and it goes YPO, it goes on and on and on. Mostly, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Victor, you're a mensch and a guy who helps out when people need help. So when I asked you to do this, I figured you could say yes or you could say no, but I figured you would probably say yes. And thank you for doing that. Happy Passover, by the way, in case I forget to say that while we go. There is going to be a Q&A in probably half an hour or so. People can use the chat room, and I know every once in a while I regret this, but if somebody wants to text me questions for Victor, feel free to do so, 310-922-1493. Yeah, everyone's got my cell phone number now. So I'm going to do this in 5 different groups. One, Victor, I'm going to start off by asking how you and your family are doing. 2, I'm going to ask what you are doing on the business front now, which is where we will get to office and studio. 3, I'm going to ask you how you got here, just from a career perspective, maybe some advice to younger people on this call. 4, what you see coming down the pike in terms of this business. And 5, philanthropy. So I'm going to make sure that we have enough time to address all of these topics. I see a wide variety of people from young and old on this group. It's great. I mean, there are people. I knew you were a popular guy when I saw Mark Genender's name popping up on this thing. I don't think Mark's had a Federation event before, so you've done that. And in response to Lisa's point, I will renew my pledge for this year at the same level as last year. So let's start with question number 1. How are you doing? How's the family doing? What have you guys been up to?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jesse. It's always great to see you. And under these circumstances, I'd rather be sitting across from you and having our normal fireside chat. But I think that's coming imminently, which is great. We've been doing great. It's spending time between, 2 or 3 locations. My kids have been spending more time at home than their own places, and it's been an interesting time. But at the end of the day, I think we've learned a lot. We've taken up a few different hobbies. Me personally, in the early days, I was zooming and cocktailing early on. by 5 o'clock almost every day with various different people. So I became somewhat of a cool mixologist and tried various different things. And that was something I tried differently than I never would have imagined that. But now, I'm in the office, as you can see. I've been in the office virtually 3 days a week since almost June, 4 days a week since basically January 1. And our team is in the office at least 2 days a week since June, with the exception of a shutdown in November and December. But yeah, we've been here and trying to semblance a little bit of a normality as a company at the same time as with being home with my family.
Great. Sounds good. And the kids are gainfully employed and everyone's doing
All three
okay?
of my kids are working and back to work and having a good time, which is nice.
Excellent. As you can see, I'm doing this from my office as well. My house is not quite this messy, but I have to say, and I think this is the type of thing that probably warms the heart of an office landlord. I feel comfortable being in my office. I mean, nobody's in my house. Even my wife is back on the East Coast most of the time these days, like Stacy. And 3 or 4 days a week, I just come into the office because it feels good. And
I like to hear that. I think, people have heard me speak and people have heard me talk a lot about this publicly, and I've announced it, listen, I'm not going to be shy about it. When they can, they all will be coming back, specifically Hudson people. Our tenants feel the same way. The CEOs of most of my larger companies have come out publicly and said the exact same thing. And so we're anticipating a massive resurgence back to the office and level of normality with some modifications, but not as much as I think people think.
Got it. Well, we'll get to that in a second when we get to the future part. So let's move to what you guys are doing now. You're the CEO of a publicly traded real estate company that I think started off doing primarily office and now does office and studio related space. Why don't you just give us an overview of your business, your holdings, your geographical priorities, and then later on we'll get to how you got there and what the tie-in is between the office business and the studio business.
Yeah, sure. So, I started Hudson in 2006. We became public in 10. So we're going on our well into our 11th year. 12th year will be the middle of this year of being public. The actual assets we bought initially were studio assets. I bought 2 studio properties pre-public. Then we bought some office buildings and took a mishmash of opportunity between San Francisco and Los Angeles public. Today, we've got several of our initial assets, and we built a portfolio in 4 main markets. It's really 4.5, but really 4 main markets. So we've got about 20 some odd million square feet of existing space between Vancouver, Seattle, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and here in LA. There's a central sort of theme to our asset quality and our tenant mix. We've probably got about 3.5 or 4 million feet of development projects that we are in the works on right now. We are expanding our platform on the studio side in 2 other marketplaces imminently, which we have owned assets, and a third. And so it's going to be a fairly cohesive, succinct marketplace. Our tenant mix, as most people know, are media tech, entertainment. Our largest tenant's Google, our second largest is Amazon, our third largest is Netflix. And so the preponderance of our tenants revolve around that. We do have a large portion of our tenancy around gaming, with Riot Games and as the lead there, and several others. And our properties are predominantly single tenant or dual tenant ownership and occupancy. All the assets that we own at Hudson are ours, with the exception of 2 JV partners that we have in CPP and Blackstone. And the combined assets there are about 15 to 20% of the portfolio that they're JV partners. So it gives you sort of a snapshot. We're NYSE traded, as everybody probably knows. Our symbol is HPP. We're 30 some odd percent today, 35% levered, and very little asset level debt. The preponderance of our debt is publicly traded debt, of that combined 35%. I think we've got 6 or 7 assets that have asset level debt on them in the portfolio, and somewhere around a $10 billion enterprise.
Wow. Interesting. So what made you, I mean, it sounds like you started off in the studio business and the office business at about the same time when you started Hudson, although I imagine your Arden experience was purely office. Was there a natural tie-in between those two different asset classes in your mind back in 2006, or did it just evolve that way?
So 2 things happened. One is sort of an interesting story around this. So, at the end of our Arden tenure, at the very end, we were marketing and going through the process of selling the company. I actually had tied up a studio facility, which was Manhattan Beach Studios at the time. And we decided to sell the company, and I took that transaction over myself and never closed it. And so I'd already had an affinity for buying those assets. So the first asset I went after that was Sunset Gower. And the reality was not around the studio play or even remotely around the voracious appetite for content that we have today. It was really a covered land play. We went into that asset, and when I bought it, we built the first office building that was ever built in Hollywood since 1980, which is the Technicolor corporate headquarters. And that led us to realizing that we can entitle and build more office. And as a result of that, between almost 60 acres of land in Hollywood, we've already built about 1.5 million square feet, and we've got almost we got entitled and we're ready to build another 500,000 square feet, and an additional 500,000 that we're working through entitlements on top of that. And so it sort of evolved beyond the process of us saying, oh, this is the direction and everything else. It really wasn't the direction. It was really just a planned process of buying a pretty good deal with excess land. But a lot of people don't realize the studio business is it's an operating business. It's not a real estate business. It's an OpCo. 35% of our revenue comes from the OpCo, not from the rent and the assets. And so that's a business that is highly foreign to people who are in the real estate business.
And how did you develop that expertise? I guess actually both of those expertise is development and the operation of the studio. I assume this didn't happen overnight.
No, studio business operations took an inordinate amount of learning curve. Just to get into the differentiation of how you're running an OpCo. That business, when we first got into that business was only a year-to-year lease business. So our tenants were all credit tenants. We never had, and still have never had since 2006, a tenant in the studio business who occupies stages default. I mean, the credit's massive, obviously. It's the Disneys and Paramounts and HBOs and Showtimes and CBS's and ABC's of the world. And now it's Apple and Amazon and Netflix and Hulu. But we've never had a default. But to operate that business, the expertise around that, we inherited that. We had to bring on people. We went through a tremendous amount of dealing with individuals who came initially and thought they were experts, and we had to modify, put systems in place that were not in place. These assets we initially bought were family-owned assets and didn't have any directional appetite as to where the future growth was. They were clipping coupons as you go. So that business took a lot of time to get our arms around and figure out the synergies and the expertise around it, and then converting it on the real estate side to longer-term leases, which was always our objective and goal that we got to accomplish. On the development side, completely different, right? We have an in-house development team, always have. The development team that I have today was really the development team that I did have with Dick Ziman and I at Arden. One of the lead guys there came with me day one, and he's been with me ever since. He's populated a complete development team. So we do everything in-house on development. We have our own internal design people, and we have all of our entitlement people, and then all the construction related individuals. So development is fully all the way ingrained in our business plan and story, and it has been since the very beginning.
Great. So you mentioned that you've not had any defaults on the studio front with any of your production tenants. I assume in your office buildings that cater to the Netflixes of the world, you're doing pretty good as well in terms of tenants paying rent.
So we've been very fortunate, Jesse, since March 16th, which is sort of the date that we sort of determined when things completely changed, and people had a different perspective of the current pandemic and the future of where the world was going to be. We have had month over month, 97% of our rents have been collected. And so we've been very lucky with it to that extent. The 3% has almost uniformly been retail, and our retail is amenitized retail tenants to our office buildings. So restaurants, coffee shops, amenity related aspects. And since we don't have the populace in the buildings, those businesses couldn't, maintain any aspect of operations. And so that's been the preponderance of our defaults and or, deferrals. We own a fairly well-known asset that is 30% retail in San Francisco called the Ferry Building. 65% of it is office tenants that pay. The 30% are high-end restaurants and retail, and none of those tenants virtually have paid up until January 1 when they all started coming back and we started seeing a flow of traffic on the ferry system. But yeah, that's the 3%.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. So even conventional office tenants whose use of their space has been sporadic, I assume, everybody's paying rent.
Yep, for the most part.
Fantastic. So what has been the effect of COVID on utilization by your tenants in the studio space and the office space? And do you see any trend? Well, I assume the trends are hopeful as the overall numbers are hopeful of late. But what has been the historic utilization of space over since March 16th of last year? So we're almost exactly.
Well, the physical utilization has been extremely low. I mean, we started off with, I would say, March, April, May, an average of 5 to 10% occupancy in all our assets. And as a real estate owner, we were considered essential workers. So we had our office space, our personal office space throughout the whole West Coast was open. But we only had, as I said, between 5 and 10%. That creeped up to about 20 by midsummer. In across the board in most of our markets. It went back down to about 10 over Thanksgiving, and now we're closer to 25 to 30. But that being said, I think the biggest changes are around the utilization of how people perceive space going forward. And I do think at the end of the day, you're looking at an expanded amount of space for the existing tenant base. So what I mean by that is, when people were looking at creative office space and the average space went down to maybe 175 feet per person. Now you're probably looking at the majority of our tenants have come back and they're saying, hey, we're going to have less people in the space, but we need more space or equal amount of space because it's closer to 250 feet per person. So they're expanding the amount of space. And how are they doing that? They're taking common areas. They're taking conference room facilities. They're using all the space that typically they were not using in the past and expanding that out. So that's a good sign. Another good indicator is, the safety and protocols that were put in place. So a tremendous amount of money went into touchless aspects in office buildings and our studio facilities. So whether it's elevators and whether it's doors, whatever the services you valet in and out, or parking structures, everything's gone touchless. The second attribute has been, the air conditioning unit. So, all of our systems have been upgraded. We put that in place day one. We were in the process anyways of trying to achieve 100% carbon neutrality by 2025. We achieved it by end of last year by putting a lot of this in place, but also by buying some aspects that helped us get there, which we would call somewhat cheats, but not that much of it, about 15% of the overall. But at the end of the day, putting all this, what this enabled us to do was expedite the capital by putting this stuff in place and now making the environment such that people aren't questioning the environments and space they're going into as tenants, and most importantly, as employees, because we've protected the downside to say this is the process that we've enabled for them to be comfortable on day-to-day employment.
Makes sense. So I've never asked you this question before, but what's the most interesting project you've worked on over the last 3 or 4 years? And it's something that you look at and you say, I'm pretty proud of the fact that I helped make that happen.
I mean, listen, I'm proud of a lot of projects, so I have to say.
Oh, you can name more than one.
So, I mean, taking an industrial facility in West LA, where everybody thought we were going to close down Roger Dunn, and we left Roger Dunn and we built Riot Games campus out of nothing. That was pretty cool.
That's
Taking
my kids think that was pretty good too.
Yeah, I mean, it worked out well. I mean, taking a San Jose based tenant that was basically selling DVDs out of mail to order and bringing them down to Los Angeles and incorporating it with the implementation of Reed Hastings and Ted Sarandos, and actually building a campus in Hollywood where nobody really thought Hollywood was a destination, was pretty cool. We did I'll tell you about 2 projects. One is in our backyard here, which most people know about, but we bought the West Side Pavilion with the complete intent of converting it to a creative office campus. And so that asset today, if you drive by it, it's now called One West Side. Is almost 700,000 square feet, and it's leased 100% to Google. They're taking over the space. It will be ready for them by summer for them to build out their TIs. They are a great example of a design that was Gensler designed asset that was pre-COVID that is going to be a post-COVID test case, because the preponderance of that asset was designed indoor-outdoor. So the backside of that asset, all the space opens up to tiered decks, outdoor and indoor. And that asset will initially was prepared to house about 3,000 employees, and Google has come to us and said they're probably going to house more like 4,000 to 5,000. And so they are really making the push to have people 24/7 working in and out of that space 5 to 7 days a week, and it's going to be a super cool, safe environment with a lot of outdoor space and utilization. So that's a pretty impressive project. In Seattle, we are breaking ground right now on the office tower that's going to be the convention center. So it's the brand new Washington State Convention Center, and they're building the convention center, and we're building the podium in the tower. And in a marketplace that has got very little, issues around pre-leasing, because everything that's being built right now is still pre-leased. We've got all the major tip of the tongue name tenants that are all Seattle-based tenants that all want to occupy that asset 100%. That's a very cool. It will have a massive timber approach to it, so it'll be one of the first timber projects that will be done. So gives you a smattering of some of the things I'm pretty proud of.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm actually looking at the West Side Pavilion from my office right now. So
we call it One West Side now.
Point. One West Side. I'm gonna have to remember that. All right, so I do want to ask you some more questions about what you think is coming next, but let's just go back in time a little bit. Would you mind just giving us a brief overview of how you started your career, how you got here, and maybe 2 or 3 tangible pieces of advice? I mean, I literally see people on this Zoom ranging from their early 20s to their well into their 80s. And I think they could probably all use a little bit of advice. So whatever historical information you choose to share with us, and then if you were a young person starting off in this business right now, how you would approach it. And I usually end with this, but I just wanted to make sure that we got to this part.
Yeah. Well, listen, I would say several points around that. And I say this all the time. I do not use the phrase luck very lightly, because I feel like I'm a very lucky and fortunate individual to have fallen into certain places and categories throughout my career that have enabled me to get to where I am today, but also how I got to where I am today. I was Canadian born, went to college in Northern California at Berkeley, came down here, worked for Drexel. And I got introduced through that relationship to who became my mentor / partner, which was Dick Simon, as everybody knows, in the late 80s. And he and I started a company in 1990 called Arden Realty, coming out of a fairly volatile time with high interest rates and access to capital issues. And he had a fantastic track record, and he put a lot of faith in me just to be his partner, never mind to do business together. And we created an amazing vehicle together that was unique and poised in a marketplace that was extremely challenging. But for my relationship with him and his mentorship and his vision as to how he wanted to grow the company, and then us getting educated in an area which I think is my first sort of life lesson, which is don't turn a blind eye to things that may or may not be something you're comfortable with. We had no idea what being public was in the real estate world. I didn't even know what a REIT was in the early 90s. When we went public in 96, and we got educated collectively and built a platform around it. And what we learned in the first 4 or 5 years was something that you can't teach anybody, because it was on the ground, hand-to-hand battle, building a portfolio. And so I think the easy route would have been, oh, let's just go raise capital, and it's a fund, and we'll do asset by asset. And we chose to do a portfolio play and do something different that I think led a number of people down that path, where people didn't really even know what REITs were. So that would be my first aspect of sort of life lessons is to anybody looking at what you may or may not want to do. Don't streamline yourself to a point where you think this is the best role or route or aspects. I really believe that whatever your perception is today, it will definitely change, and how you get educated, but you need to be guided along that process. And so being a great sort of a sponge to information and aspects around that. Jesse, part of what I look at the success of what was now I guess it was 15 years ago when we sold. So it would have been 25 years ago when we went public, and 31 years ago when we started Arden, believe it or not. These are the numbers. They're
like yesterday.
Yeah, it does seem like yesterday, but part of that aspect, and then now it's, as I said, 16 years at having this company and 11 at being public. To me, I would say the greatest lesson I've ever learned is just that of being in relationships. And relationships for me are picking up the phone, and I still do it today. I did it this morning to somebody and you're going to get a kick out of it, and I'll tell you offline, to talk about a deal that has come our way. And I picked up the phone, and he picked up the phone, and we caught up for 15 minutes, and now we're working on something. And those relationships are invaluable. It's never about the last deal. It's about the connection all the way through. I've maintained a few principles in my life in business. One of which is, it used to be in the old days, if you called me, I would call you back the same day. Today, it's the same aspect on emails. I return my emails, I swear, faster than anybody I know. If it's on my email, I return them fast.
You return them very quickly.
So it's just out of respect. I don't care who it is. It's out of respect. At the end of the day, somebody's taking the time to reach out, and therefore I'm going to respond. And I do think that your reputation is more valuable than people perceive. In a day where we're talking about 435 new SPACs that have come out, and NFTs that people are focused their time on, or day traders that people are making a ton of money. I mean, it's all great, but at the end of the day, what's really important is working through a process and collaboration, and getting people to stay on board with you and your thought process, and try to move the ball down the road. And so I've always been of the mindset that there is really no substitute for hard work. And I think the older people on the call realize that, and the younger people on the call will realize that. There's a lot of cases that you seem to remember of people making money quickly, but for the most part, most of those cases are people who have worked diligently and been fair to people around them. And that pay it forward phrase is a very important one.
I couldn't agree with you more on the relationship front. And even I think you used the term relationship probably 10 times in that description. It's critically important. Somebody who was an elder statesman in this business 30 some years ago when we were both getting started, I remember once telling me, look, if I do 10 good deals and I'm honest 10 times in a row, when I come to somebody for the 11th deal, they're probably going to ask, what have you done for me lately? But they're going to invest with me. If I screw somebody, and this was a tough guy. But he said, I've never screwed anybody over. And if I screw somebody over once, that's it. I'm not going to get the opportunity for the next deal. So am I going to give them a sweetheart deal? Absolutely not. Am I going to negotiate hard? Absolutely. Am I going to be fair? Every single time? It's done, it did this guy fairly well. And I think your focus on relationships has served you well as well, but it is critically important. I just, this focus on just getting the best deal that anybody can get over the course of the next 5 minutes just doesn't seem to make a tremendous amount of sense. And as I said, you do return emails and texts very
well. I will say two quick things, which people won't. The one thing will shock people. I personally have never sued anybody in my entire life. I've never sued somebody at all. And so I would much rather resolve and move forward than deal with the pain of paying. I pay you enough money on transactional business. I don't need to pay your firm on litigation business. So that is something. The other thing is that, some of my peers who people perceive them to be competitors and they're not, CEOs of other companies, they do a deal. I'm the first guy to reach out and congratulate them. And instantly they send something back, instantly thanking. Because, people doing good things or good things for them, that's great. It's not to me about competition. It's about being successful and, keeping moving it down the road. So those are two important factors.
Yeah, this will sound like an odd thing coming from a lawyer, but I know plenty of people who use litigation as just a normal business tactic. And to me, using litigation as a business tactic is like, using a baseball bat. I mean, it's just not a socially acceptable thing to do, and is something that people should just use, I would say, as an absolute last resort. Well, that was very useful on the career front. Thanks, Victor. So what do you think is next? I mean, you talked a little bit about different utilization of office space. And just to put this in context, outside of the office space business, I remember 20 years ago representing Lehman when they were doing studio deals, and you referred to, I think you used the term mom and pop before, and it really did seem like a mom and pop business. And now it's an institutional business, I think in part as a function of just the credits that are there in the space. What's next? What's next in the office world? What's next? I mean, forget about COVID. I mean, I realize COVID will have an effect. And it's funny because I represent lots of landlords who own lots of CBD office projects, and they ask me for many other tenants or law firms. They ask me how I think law firms are going to wind up utilizing space, whether work from home is going to become permanent or not permanent. You're a hell of a lot more of a visionary than I am. What do you think comes next over the next 1, 5, 10 years?
Well, listen, I've spent a lot of time, evaluating, having conversations with other CEOs who are running businesses that are not real estate businesses. And I think at the end of the day, I really am fairly comfortable around factually saying that, the death of office is no longer going to be on people's tongues. The experience that we've experienced in the last 12 months of not being socially interactive and not being physically together and not being as productive. I was in a meeting yesterday outside the office, actually in somebody's office. We were talking about this very thing. And I said, there's zero chance that in the middle of this meeting, I would pick up this. Okay. And in front of you right now, respond to an email or a text or anything else, because it would be disrespectful. I would never be able to do business with you again. And it's just something you would never do. But right now, of the 15 people on this call, people are doing that. Okay. Now this is me talking, so it's different. But if we were in a meeting together on a Zoom, you would never call people out for that. But people are multitasking. which is great if it's efficient, but we all know it's not. And so you don't leave a meeting and walk out of a room and with you and I, and then I say, hey, come talk to me for 2 minutes because I want to talk about this, this, and this, or this is what I need to think about, or what do you think of what was said here? It's not done anymore. So you got to regroup, you got to rethink. And so the productivity level is no longer what people think. And I do believe that the companies that are coming out and make statements like you don't have to come back to the office, or you can come back a couple of days a week, eventually those employees that want to move up the corporate ladder, that want to be seen, that want to be onboarded, that want to be interactive, that want to have mentors, will leave those companies for the companies that do. And I just think that's emphatically what's going to happen. Now, is that to say that people aren't going to go back to work 5 days a week? I'm not sure it's 5 days a week right away. Maybe it's 4, maybe it's 3.5, but eventually it will be back to some sense of normality. And we're finding that in every instance with every one of the companies that I'm dealing with. I don't have Salesforce and Benioff as a tenant, right? I do have Jack Dorsey. He's a tenant at Square. They're going back, but at Twitter, they're not. So I don't know what the difference is. But for the most part, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, the leaders in our businesses are all going back. They're just deciding on when it is. So I see that as a very bright light down the road. I do think there's going to be a lot of changes, though, Jesse, and I think those changes are going to be fairly difficult initially. So the best case scenario are the tech companies that I mentioned, the Apples and Googles and Facebooks of the world created their entire enterprise based on this campus facility, this creative office ability, this interaction. To let that culture go just right out the window, it just doesn't make any sense. That's how they built their enterprise. So it's not going to go that way at the end of the day. But what they offered before is going to change. So they all offered 3 meals a day, and you would walk into this great, the spaceship at Apple, which I've been to 10 times. It's a fantastic commissary, and people are all sitting around together and grabbing food. That's going to change. That correlates to on the studio side of the business. When our production facilities, when outside the studios, there's these great long tables with massive amounts of food, and you pick it up and you go in your trailer, or you go sit in a chair, or you sit with other people. That's all going to change because you can't interact that same way today. Eventually it may come back, but it's going to come back in a different form. So people need to be very cognizant of this 6 feet, masks, whatever that comfort level is, until they get more comfortable. And for those of you who've not been back to your offices, your first time back will be a little shocking and a little tenuous, and you'll step away and you won't step in an elevator with somebody else. Maybe the first time you'll step with nobody, then you're going to step in with one person, then it'll be 2 people. But it takes time to adapt. And I'm a big believer of the adaptability going forward. I do think that at the end of the day, you're going to see a swing the other way. Now, let me just comment on what I think about the markets in general, and it's dictated on capital. So in the last 6+ months, value add deals, there were very few in the marketplace, and those that were in the marketplace didn't get a lot of bids. Most recently, there was a deal that we looked at in the Bay Area, and it was a first value add deal, 70% vacant, that had 50 offers on a 70% vacant asset. And the best and final went over 20% of what the initial indication was going to be. So it just shows you the amount of capital in the marketplace that is going to press for quality stuff at the end of the day is going to differentiate between what I would say the A's and the B's. And so if you have an A asset, whether it's value add, or we've already seen A assets that are bondable yield credit tenant assets going for crazy pricing. But the difference between the A's and the B's, I think that class is going to move fairly efficiently in terms of what you want to buy for opportunistic and what you want to buy to hold for a longer period of time. And I think in this, whatever this next cycle looks like, that gap will be the largest gap we've ever seen in terms of quality and buyer pool at the end of the day. There's going to be a lot more on the A side and a lot less on the B side.
Makes sense. By the way, the asset that you were referring to before, did you think that the price that it went for was irrational?
No, it was actually the indicative price was 60% of what it would have been in December of 19.
Got it.
And so it ended up being priced around 80%.
Okay. A couple more things. And by the way, now I feel self-conscious about checking my phone while I'm talking to you, but it's just to look for questions that people are asking. And one guy, in fact, asked whether you've given up on the 49ers since they don't see any jerseys in the background in your office anymore. So
I'm a big Rams fan. I have a big soft spot in my heart for the Niners, but I'm a big Rams fan. So
that's the way to go. Apparently.
I'm a sports fan anyway. So
sounds good. Your people, your employees, what has the effect of this been on them, and how do you keep them engaged and interested when you're not seeing them face to face every day? Although I recognize that you and other office landlords have had more face to face interaction than others do. But I don't just sense. I mean, I can tell because I try to talk to everybody who works for me on a fairly regular basis. That people don't know how to react to this whole thing. I mean, it's some people love it, some people hate it, but nobody really knows how to react to it. So what are you doing on that front?
Well, first of all, from the very beginning, we started having every 2 weeks, then it moved to every 3 weeks, and then once a month, Zoom calls for the whole company. And it would be a one-way Zoom call, messaging, talking, they'd ask questions, we would answer, we would respond. Then after our quarterly calls, we have updates. And so we've been updating our employees on a regular basis and getting feedback. And clearly we've gone through not just COVID related, but massive shifts in terms of DEI training, which we've done online for our executives. We've gone through massive integration of ESG and protocols and focused around hiring on the S side, on the E side, sustainability, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, we've spent a ton of time communicating, messaging. We've done employee surveys. And just try to stay in touch. But still, there's no substitute for getting on a plane and going to see your properties, your regions, your employees. And at the end of the day, I do think, and I've gone to Seattle a couple of times, I've gone to San Francisco a couple of times, but I would go to Vancouver, Seattle, and San Francisco once every 6 weeks. I can't get to Vancouver because I can't get back. And so I haven't been to Vancouver in over a year.
You, a Canadian, can't even get back.
I can't get back. I still have to be quarantined, so I won't do it. But the reality is there's just no substitute for that. And I think our employees understand it. And so we've had a challenging time, but a very consistent time trying to maintain a form of communication on various forms and functions. We've done we have what is called Hudson Youth. So all of our new employees, we have this every 6 weeks. We probably got 30, 35 people every 6 weeks, new employees in the company. We do it all through Zoom. It's horrible. They would all be down in LA in our corporate offices and have a 2-day experience. Now it's a 1-day experience and it's through Zoom. It's just not the same. You don't get the feel in the same culture. So the extension around that to try and make your employees feel comfortable has been a task that we've really been trying to maintain, and we'll have to continue to do so. But we feel it's changing relatively quickly.
And you've had new employees come in, I think you just said, during COVID. So accelerated ways of inculcating these people into your corporate culture. Inculcating may be the wrong word, but
yeah, you're just educating them on what the culture is and spending time, and then really relying on the regional managers and to engage and sort of direct our messaging and the likes of that. Yeah, very much so.
Sounds good. So it wouldn't be a Jewish Federation presentation without talking about philanthropy a little bit. As I mentioned before, you're on more boards than I really had time to read before. What role does philanthropy play in your life? How do you choose where to spend your time and dollars? Do you have a strategy and an approach to it? Is it just what feels right? Why don't you give us a few minutes on?
Yeah, absolutely. So and as Jason Anderson has heard me say this story before, I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia. And, ever since I was, I think 7 or 8 years old, Federation has been part of my life. It was part of the foundation. It was really the only Jewish charitable organization that was a part of sort of the Vancouver environment of the Jewish community. And so I was a member of the JC. gave from as a little boy all the way through, and that stayed with me my whole life. The Federation has been one of many things that I've spent a tremendous amount of time and energy on. As you know, I spent a lot of time on medical related aspects. I have made a massive shift on climate and climate related organizations. And, personally and professionally, we just announced and we did a match from our institutional investors and personally executives of the company. But we just gave $20 million to the homelessness up and down the West Coast, equally in all 4 of our main markets. And we're striving to do something different than anybody else on that. We're not just going to be a mouthpiece. We're actually giving money to organizations that are actually building facilities in all these marketplaces. And I think, to answer your question indirectly, we will continue, and I personally will continue to expand my my educational aspects on other areas of philanthropy as need and deemed fit, with the base foundation of the several that I've stuck with my whole life.
That's fantastic. And just on the homelessness front, so you guys are selectively choosing organizations locally, or you're just donating to one large pot of dollars? It sounded like it was more active.
No, we're very active. I think listen, homelessness problem is extremely sad throughout the whole West Coast, really in the whole country. So we are very active in with specific partners that we have given money to build facilities in all of our markets.
That's fantastic. Well, your office is right across from the VA. I mean, I'm sure you see this stuff all the time, and it's a real problem, and it needs addressing. Well, Victor, thank you very much. I think I said I would get you off the line by 2:58. It's 2:58 now. Again, I know you're a busy guy. Thank you for doing this. Thanks everybody for joining. Happy Passover to everybody. And Victor, I hope to see you in person soon.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate the invite. Hope everybody's safe. Bye now.
Take care, everyone. Bye.